And then I'm going to segue into our speaker. The reason I'm going to do that is because I had a conversation with him today. And the reason I'm doing this is because we have supported the Rotary E-Club of World Peace. And this year, this moment, we have invited them to join us. And I want to introduce Ray Naylor, who is the president of the Rotary E-Club of World Peace. Ray, raise your hand at us so we see who you are. When I asked if they would like to be our co-sponsor, Ray said absolutely. And I said, then I went to Rudy, who co-founded the Rotary E-Club of World Peace with me. And he said, yes, we put it in the newsletter. And you will look at the people up here today who have joined us to hear our wonderful speaker, Douglas Roche. His book, Keeping Hope Alive in Essays for a War-Torn, War-Free World. Keep Hope Alive, Essays for a War-Free World. This morning, I was so full of energy and I said, I got to relax. This meeting's coming up in a couple of hours. So I turned on peacepodcast.org. Now, I know what he said, but I listened to it again. I couldn't believe it. He has a model that we need for our future and what we can do and how we are able to bring hope into our world. And so let me just say, are you here with us today? Douglas Roche, raise your hand. They all see him. Now, Douglas, you're muted. I just want to say welcome.
Yes, I'm here, Barbara. Thank you very much.
Okay, I was going to, Douglas, if in the beginning of your talk, would it be okay if I put you on speaker view and then, or do you want us to stay with the full gallery so you can see people's faces?
Just as you wish.
Okay, I'm going to put him on speaker view, and as soon as I introduce him, and Ray Naylor, did you want to say a couple of words? Ray,
I just wanted to say thank you for the invitation for our club members. I too have listened to the podcast, and I have also just finished his book. And I want to say thank you, Doug. It really is stimulating. A lot of essays, a lot of short essays in there on what we need to move forward. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And the Rotary E-Club of World Peace meets every Tuesday night at 6:30, and it is amazing, the speakers. Last week, they talked about empathy. How can we have empathy in these uncertain times? So I just wanted to give Ray a attaboy, and David Wick has been doing, raise your hand, David. He brings us to Pathways to Peace. May peace prevail on earth. There's so many great people in my life. All I can do is say thank you. And you are the people who are bringing our future into the real reality of peace. All right. Honorable Douglas Roche is our speaker today. I have known him for so many decades. Why? Because he and my late husband, Dr. Robert Mueller, wrote the book, Safe Passage to the 21st Century. Imagine, Safe Passage to the 21st Century. Was that the name of the book?
Yes.
Okay. Honorable Douglas Roche is an author, a parliamentarian. He has written 25 books. He's a diplomat. 25 books, think of that. He has specialized throughout his 50-year public career in peace and human security issues. It couldn't be more appropriate right now. He was elected chairman of the United Nations Disarmament Committee at the 43rd General Assembly in 1988. The author, as I said, of 25 books. The latest is Keep Hope Alive, Essays for a War-Free World, came out recently. I wrote it hey, Ray, you must write a review and put it on Zoom. I did, put it on Amazon. I did a review on Amazon. He is a creative person. He is a political struggle person. He allows us to know that we are not safe right now. And so that's why he wrote the book. How do you keep hope alive in uncertain times? And so I said to Douglas, I would like to have you speak to our E-Club of World Peace, and I'd like also to speak to our UNA. So I said, well, what would you like me to do? Do you want to just speak? He said, ask me a question. So I'm going to tell you, I'm going to ask him a question. He's going to speak. And then after that, you can ask him your questions. But the question that came to me in these uncertain times is, what can we do to keep hope alive? And how can we continue to have hope in these times of overwhelm and uncertainty? And with that, Douglas Roche, welcome.
Thank you, Barbara, and hello to everyone. A young woman I know is heartbroken at what the election of Donald Trump as United States president portends for the world. The agenda for peace will be trampled and militarism will reign. She's a specialist in climate change issues, and she's despondent that defense spending around the world, as well as the United States, will skyrocket under Trump's demands, robbing future generations of the funds necessary to combat global warming and protect everyone's health. What can I tell her in this dark hour of catastrophic misjudgment by half the American people? First of all, I have no intention of trying to soothe her with placatory words. She sees her professional future crumbling. I know the feeling. For often in my long professional life, I've had the feeling that the forces of evil are just too much and too often triumph over goodness. Trump's victory, based on glorifying the powerful and dehumanizing the weak, reinforces the ancient Roman adage, if you want peace, prepare for war. All my life, I have believed that if you want peace, you must prepare for peace. This means standing up to the powerful who demand weapons to protect themselves while the marginalized are left to beg for crumbs from the tables of the rich. The circle of death and exploitation seems to go on and cannot be stopped. Humanity, fallen, cannot lift itself out of this abyss. Well, I do have such thoughts, and I would be false to my young friend and to you if I did not admit it. But I overcome them by recognizing the blossoming of intelligence that is a chief characteristic of our time. Just because he won does not mean that Trump speaks for all Americans. After all, some 70 million people voted against him. We are not fated to the dark view of Trump. Rather, we must join with the millions of people who understand that our world has become a human community, interconnected in every sphere of activity. And we have the communications and political structures to enable us to interact. This is an empowering discovery, no matter how the American election turned out. It is the trend line of history we must pay attention to, not just the results of one election. The hope for the future that I am offering my young friend is by no means an empty gesture of consolation. It is rather a call to recognize that the immense changes involved in moving the world from the old culture of war to a new culture of peace require a long period of time, perhaps even a century. The new enlightenment will not descend over either the public or the political decision makers overnight. We have to slog our way through the marshes. My friend worries that she will be of retiring age before the progressive policies take hold. Again, I have been there. I have had to learn that hope is not something delivered to you on a platter. It is in working to energize the political process that we find hope and strength. Hope is best understood as a verb, connoting an active desire to fulfill an expectation. We fail, we suffer, we go on. The worst mistake is to feel that we are alone. Only a few weeks ago, The Summit of the Future was held at the United Nations, where all countries adopted a pact for the future. That pact promises to create a safer, more peaceful, and sustainable world for future generations. The pact, supported by nations and peoples around the world, is much greater than the Make America Great Again movement. It's true that Trump has mesmerized a big chunk of the American public, but he does not have progressive nations with him, even though he will try to bully them. Trump is a last gasp of a dying culture, not the forerunner of the new age. I want to tell my young friend that I too am suffering. I will not reach the world of my vision. Trump has got in my way. But like myself, she must take heart that our personal participation in developing the human security agenda is the indisputable requirement of our times. Hope is its own reward, and hope is how we survive.
Thank you, Douglas. You know, in your podcast, you mentioned the culture of peace, and you said that's our hope, that if we can have these cultures of peace and places where we can get together with people who are on the same wave that we are on, that we will then have a period of culturally aware citizens and action. Could you talk a little bit about that? Have you seen in your history, you mentioned in the podcast after World War II, what happened?
I'll tell you what happened after World War II. The United Nations was formed. I have in my hand, I wish I could show it to everybody, a book containing the Charter of the United Nations in 6 official languages. Actually, I treasure this book. It was given to me by Javier Perez de Cuellar when he was the Secretary General of the United Nations in the 1980s. He inscribed it to me, to Ambassador Douglas Roche, in appreciation of his commitment to the cause of the United Nations. And I hold this book close to me because of what is contained in it that I turn to in dark times. Let me take just a moment to read a couple of passages from the preamble to the Charter. We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind, and to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women and of nations large and small. And then it goes on to practice tolerance and live together in peace with one another as good neighbors, and to unite our strength to maintain international peace and security. Those are thrilling words and a basis on which the post-World War II was built. And we're now coming up next year to the 80th anniversary of the foundation of the United Nations. The United Nations has had its ups and downs, and we all know that. There's lots of problems in it and so on. But it remains our North Star. And in this moment of transition that the world is going through, I hold this document as my North Star. You asked me what we can do to move to a culture of peace. Well, the first thing is a reaffirmation of what is in the Charter, and not let that Charter slip away from the decision-making processes in the country. So this opens up a whole wide subject and area of activity, and I feel that we are in the world, we are moving from the old culture of war, which in the 20th century took 100 more than 100 million lives, more than 100 million people killed in the two world wars of the 20th century. So today we have immense dislocation, and we have wars, we have suffering. And I do not wish anybody on this at this meeting or this program today to think that I'm sort of forgetting or easing off of the immense suffering that goes on in Ukraine and Gaza and Sudan and other places today. I'm very conscious of that, but I have also to be conscious of the long trend line of history in which I believe that it is indisputable that we are moving away from a culture of war, which 100 million people killed in the 20th century, to what has been defined as a culture of peace, namely a set of values revolving around nonviolence. We're not there yet. As I said a moment ago, it's going to be a long time we're getting there. It is our fate or our challenge to be born and to live at a time of great, immense change, and change includes setbacks. So this is the way I feel, Barbara, about what happened in the United States. I think that we have to take a longer view and recognize, and I know that I'm speaking to Americans for whom I have the greatest respect for you. And I lived in the United States for 8 years, so I feel I know you, and I certainly know California. I've been there, been through your wonderful areas many times. But we have to recognize that we're talking about a big world, a very big world, in which millions upon millions of people are grasping out for arms control and disarmament, for economic and social development, for environmental protection, and for the extension of human rights. That is our task, to redouble our efforts today.
Boy, do I agree with you, and I'm sure everybody here on this call does too. My grandfather left Hungary when the coffin maker was piling up the coffins, and he said to him, "Why are you piling up the coffins? The war's coming." My grandfather left. He got on the boat, met my grandmother, they got married, and here I am. Now, why did he leave? Hope. He had hope for a better world. He had hope that he would not become a person of war. He would not become a war fighter. At my dinner table in the evenings, he would talk about peace. And that's what he wanted. That's why he came to the United States. We are the United States of hope. So what is going on? What does hope really mean, Douglas?
Well, hope is energizing our aspirations for peace and security and fairness and a life of nonviolence. Hope is, as I said, it's not something that you go out and you find it someplace. It comes from within us as a result of the energizing of our own internal systems, that we do not let ourselves become subsumed or overcome by adversity. So, I mean, I just took a few moments in my opening to say, I mean, that we're living in a difficult time now. I regard it as difficult I call myself a citizen of the world. But we have to remember that we're immensely affected by everything that the United States government does. That is true. But we're living in a time of change, of political change, when world systems, the multilateral system, as the Pact for the Future said very clearly, the Pact for the Future, just adopted by the UN, says we pledge a new beginning in multilateralism, a new beginning in multilateralism. So you counterpoint Trump's America First with the world view of a new multilateralism, and you can certainly build a case that the Trump organizations have made a colossal mistake in assessing America, that everything is revolving around America, when there's a whole world out there of of the people and nations who do want to have nuclear disarmament, who do want to have the Sustainable Development Goals extended, who do want to have environmental protection and belong to the Paris Agreement, and who do want a full panoply of human rights. So we've got to just remember that we're on a course of history and participate that way.
Well, that's very interesting. You said course of history, because David Wick just wrote in the chat that my experience and research have convinced me that the world is on the verge of the greatest change in human history. The transition from a culture of war that we have had in tens of thousands of years to a new culture, the culture of peace.
Well, those are my sentiments. Those are my thoughts. I believe that the United Nations offers us a vehicle, and I don't agree at all with those who think that the United Nations, the best days of the United Nations, are behind it. I think that the United Nations is itself struggling, but it has found the way through the Pact for the Future and the Summit of the Future to bring all the nations of the world together. The United States is 5% of the population of the world, and so there's a great areas of activity in nations and new groupings, and so we have to look forward that way.
Well, David goes on to talks about a culture of peace is a set of values, attitudes, traditions, and models of behavior, a way of life. And we have created in Santa Barbara, we are an international city of peace. And that is really important. And I was thinking if we could have all the cities in the United States who are really active in peace become international cities of peace and have a peace pole, as Larry Strober has said, then we have some combination that we can do work together. And are we at a course of changing history right now, do you think?
Well, it was Mr. Cheney, the former vice president, who said back in the earlier days, and looking at the future, that what we're facing is maybe unknown unknowns. We like to operate in an atmosphere in which everything is known. We can understand it all, but our world is changing so fast now that there are unknowns. We're not sure of how the framework of the world will continue to be developed. We saw that framework established by the inauguration of the United Nations, which gave us a liberal international order, and many think that is falling apart now with the rise of autocracy in other countries, and of course the Ukraine war has pinpointed the sharp divisions between the East and the West today. So I would be wary of anybody who says they know where the future is going. We're not sure. My whole call here today is for us to participate in trying to build, trying to contribute to, trying to foresee our participation as individuals in trying to strengthen in every way we can. And of course, the principal way of that is to reaching into the political establishment and by having our voice heard. And I believe a voice should be the world first in the alleviation of suffering, the reduction and elimination of nuclear weapons, the protection of our environment, the climate changes which we're seeing every day in temperature rise, floods, fires everywhere. The whole dislocation of our nature, all that is a threat to our continuation of our humanity. So all those things we reach out to and touch and communicate that politically.
And Bettina Gray said that with the way the world is today, we're going to need new techniques and new tools to make this peace a possibility. Do you agree with that?
Well, yes. I mean, I mean, for me, the tool is international law, and we have the International Court of Justice, we have the International Criminal Court, and what we need to do is to put more resources into them and to give them jurisdiction. Like I've been a great believer that humanity is rising. You know, if you go back 1,000 years or 100 years, it's very clear that the human condition is improving and that there's an elevation of humanity taking place. But we have not yet reached a stage when we have enforceable international law. I'll give you an example about just what I mean, a homely example. If you get in your car and you go and you drive a car through a red light, policeman gives you a ticket, and you got to go to court. Why? Because the local law is enforceable. But if you're a country, you got nuclear weapons, you threaten to use them. There's no, we have a court that says nuclear weapons should be abolished, but you can't enforce it. And so we haven't reached in our journey of humanity, we have not yet reached a stage when we will accept to have. I mean, everybody will basically will accept to have an international law that applies to all. And that's the only way in a globalized world, in a world in which everything is interconnected, whether we're talking about the pandemic, nuclear weapons, the climate, we're all interconnected. We all know that in our work in the United Nations. And so we have to recognize that we have to move our judicial systems forward to have enforceable international law.
That's exactly what Ben Ferencz said in his Peace podcast. He said, we need to have a court of law for the United Nations, and we need to have laws that allow us to live our life without, as David Newman just said, how can we persuade the USA to support and accept the jurisdiction of the International Court of Criminal Calls, the ICC?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there has to be a public buildup of understanding, and that gets you into the media and it gets you into education. And these are the fundamentals of how our society changes by the education of people to understand how the mechanisms that we need in order to live. We have to have strong institutions. John F. Kennedy said that too. He said, Kennedy said, we're not going to make the world better by a sudden revolution. We're going to make it better by the steady evolution of institutions and the strengthening of them. So, Barbara, we've got the International Court of Justice. We've got the International Criminal Court. There's no need for us to be floundering around saying, what should we do? We know what to do. The question is the political will to do it. So, in my view, we've just had a big setback in the American election, and I'm sorry if I'm offending anybody here. I mean, you might say, "What?" This is a good point. I'm now going to make. You might say, "What right does this Canadian here have to tell us, the American people, the American people, what right does he have to tell us about the good or bad things about the American election? Why doesn't he worry about his own elections?" Well, the answer to that is very clear. The United States election was not only the election of a person to the president of the United States. It was an election for the world, and all the world is affected by this. So we have a vested interest in the United States participating and continuing to participate in the United Nations. And that gets you to the question of how much support the U.S. will give. And I don't know. I mean, the standard has been 25%, but I believe that it was too much. And it was done at the end of when the United Nations began at the end of World War II. The United States was by far the richest country, and therefore it very gallantly took on 25% of the share of the cost. But in years that followed, there were various efforts at reform. And every so often they said, well, the United States financial participation should be reduced. And others just step up and say more. And of course, the biggest objection to lessening the American assessment in the United Nations came from the United States government, because they said, we don't want to reduce our influence. And so they kept it at more, maybe 20, maybe 22 in some areas, but it's a disproportionate amount. And I fault other countries like India and China and those other countries that are big, massive countries that are paying a pittance for the United Nations compared to what the Americans do. So it would be better if there was a realignment and this reform of the United Nations, which has been talked about for so long, and there's been various formulas used. I was very glad to see the Biden administration say that it supported the introduction of two African countries as permanent members of the Security Council. I hope that is followed through. But we need to have a strengthening of the Security Council. There should be Germany, Japan, India, and Brazil, at least those four countries, also added to the Security Council. And when that happens, the pressure on the United States, or sort of the manner in which the United States operates, will be inside the framework of the United Nations will be somewhat reduced. Even though the veto is retained. I mean, naturally, I'd like to get rid of the veto, but you can't get rid of the veto, but it can be mitigated. And it is being mitigated now by the new rule that any country that exercises a veto has to go before the General Assembly to explain itself. So that's at least a step in the right direction. But I believe that it might be a strange kind of turn of events. I mean, if that for the United Nations will be better off in a long run by a reduced American financial contribution and other nations stepping up, and by spreading out of political power by adding to the Security Council a number of states, as I've said.
Yeah, and Bettina wrote, the very fact of having this meeting like we're having today couldn't have happened even 10 years ago or even 20 years ago. So you have a chapter in the book called Zoom. Zoom is, I was looking to see the exact title. Talk about why you wrote a chapter on Zoom.
Well,
Zoom in the peace community, that's your chapter number 15.
Yeah, Zoom it wasn't invented by the pandemic, but it was during the pandemic that the Zoom meetings took off, and we began to discover a new way of meeting, and even in families as well as business and political meetings and so on. So it is a new way of connecting. We're connecting now by Zoom, and it's. It enables us to reach out and to see one another and to hear from one another, and I would love to hear from some of the people on this program instead of hearing myself. So.
I'm going to go back to gallery view, and then if you have a question, please raise your hand and Douglas Roche will answer it. And I want to thank you all for joining us today. To hear these words and have this many people listening today and then carrying on a change and action that they want to happen. Thank you, Douglas Roche. And David, would you be first asking us a question? A simple question, okay? Simple. So he can answer it. Go ahead, David.
I think she take this one. Let me just guys, I'm talking now. I have a question. Can I please talk? Sorry, everyone.
Okay.
Yeah, my comment to Mr. Roche is, first of all, I cannot imagine a world without the World Health Organization combating disease worldwide, leading the fight against COVID as they did, and leading the World Center for Health. Mr. Trump wants to withhold U.S. funding to the World Health Organization, and I fear if he does, other countries might follow suit in the same course. Then this might also lead to the Pan American Health Organization that benefits all of South America and the U.S. also losing funding. So what can we do to encourage the United States to continue our funding for WHO and to combat this threat to world health?
Well, yes, of course, the United States should maintain a supportive stand and financial input into the World Health Organization. It's the central clearinghouse, so to speak, of the improvement of health conditions around the world, and the spotting and handling of pandemics and vaccines and all those other elements of good health that need to be extended, particularly in the impoverished areas. But health is, I mean, is definitely related to the poverty issue, which is related to the Sustainable Development Goals. And so to have strengthen the input into health, a good vehicle for that is the Sustainable Development Goals. I forget which number of the 17 Sustainable Goals concentrates on improving world health. I mean, it's a basic human right to be able to live in a healthful atmosphere.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate your question, David. And I'm going to go to Jerry and Des in Canada. Do you have a question? I think you're muted. You are muted. Okay, Jerry.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Douglas for his upbeat and important comments. Douglas is a hero of humanity, a visionary's hero of humanity, and so deserves the title. So thank you very much for this, because like you, I have been talking to a lot of people this week, and the amount of devastation is around the issue of the election in America is incredible. But I have an entirely different take on this. As devastated as I also am by the halting of the momentum that you talked about at the beginning, that it's the moment for change. As devastating as that is, it also energizes a lot of people in the world to feel differently. And unlike you, I don't have the patience, which is that it's a very long time ahead that peace is coming. I feel we need a defiant response to what is happening. And I too think the United Nations has an important role to play, but I have a different take on it, perhaps because I haven't been an official part of it. I think that one of the things that's going on now is what you brought to the table at the beginning, which was the preamble to the United Nations, again beginning we the people, because I think that the people of the world need to stand up now and show a different point of view in an aggressive and defiant way, that you can't just run over people the way Donald Trump is acting. And I don't think all the 80 million people or however many voted for Trump really want that. They were concerned with their own issues. And so I think that, and where I want you to respond to this question is that we are moving forward with a movement called Pax Humana, the peace of humanity, by putting forward a different vision than was needed in 1945 at the end of that horrible war. Because Douglas, you give some statistics, and as a scientist, I look at that and say, okay, well, 5% of the world is America, and if American people are 5% and 2.5% voted in this way, what about the rest of us in the world? And the thing about United Nations is also, I think David just brought up, is what about the agencies of the United Nations? What about the NGOs of the United Nations? You see, I think that one of the things that people don't understand about the brain is that if you show people a vision of a mother and a child, it doesn't matter what language they speak or what rhythm they dance with. They all look at that in the same heartfelt way. And if you hurt that mother and child, everyone in the world who has got any kind of sensibility looks at that vision. And so what I think we need to do is go beyond not having war, but create a real vision that United Nations SDGs stand for. We have to deal with all the
Right
issues.
there. As your word vision, I would like to bring that over to Douglas. Douglas, what do you think about that word vision?
Well, the United Nations has expressed very clearly a vision in the culture of peace. In the year 2000, the culture of peace was adopted, and for a whole decade. And there were many programs that were starting and so on, but it was overtaken by the terrorist attacks of 9/11, which caused the resurgence of militarism, and the culture of peace was just pushed off the table. We must bring back the ideas of a culture of peace now, because it is a vision. It's a vision, of course, but it's also a program that the Nobel laureates said it was eminently doable in aligning our institutions to project health, education, and nonviolence, and the basic attributes of a peaceful world, a world with security, with peace and security, and some social justice. I mean, it's a struggle to push these ideas today, when we live at a time of excessive militarism in the United States, especially. I mean, it's horrendous the amount of money that is spent on the military. And Jerry, thank you for your comments. I agreed with what you said, but I do think that we do have a vision that is both philosophical, and one we even say spiritual, in the sense of bringing humanity together. But it's also eminently practical in that we have to do this today in a globalized world in which we're all trying to survive.
I agree with you. And David Wick has his hand up. And this vision idea is just so powerful. And it's almost like we have to carry this with us. It's like carrying hope with us. I remember one of my podcasts with Ben Ferenc, who from the ICC, said, it takes courage not to be discouraged. And I keep saying those words. It takes courage not to be discouraged. And he was a lawyer for the Nuremberg trials, and I interviewed him at 100. So we're getting the wisdom of his 100 years and watching the history that he lived through. He said that again to me at the end of his interview, our end of our conversation. It takes courage not to be discouraged. And that's what I give you today. David Wick, please.
So I very much agree, just in terms of the long-term evolution. We are in evolution, and we're dealing with the next 4 years, and here we are. And to me, it also calls forward doing our work all the more and moving forward. And as you said, Barbara, also building our local, what can we do locally and reach that. And obviously, a powerful part of this election is communication, and is the imaging, and is the languaging that is used. And I would say, well, I'll ask you, what do you think that we can and need to do in the peace building arena to engage in another level of communication in our language and our images that are really exciting, engaging, rather than the same old?
Right. And Mel, I do see your hand. Why don't you answer that, Douglas, and then we'll go to Mel.
Well, you say the same old. It's been old for a long time to contact politicians, but it's also in a new atmosphere in which the urgency of expressing ourselves. If we do not stand up, particularly at a time when there's this wave going over us of nationalism and selfishness and rejection of international cooperation, I mean, then I think we're failing to do our duty to stand up. And I mean, not everybody can go and be the Secretary General of the United Nations, but everybody can at least reach out and to the political order, to the congressmen, the senators, our voice counts, and
I agree with that.
the people who elected Trump, they were using their voice, and
Yeah.
so I think we
I mean,
have to counter that.
Mel?
Excellent presentation, Doug. I have a couple of questions. What low-hanging fruit do you see for reform of the UN? I have a notion that we should put the losers of World War II back into the eligible pool for participation in the Security Council. A lot of people don't realize that Japan and Germany, Italy, people that lost World War II can't be on the Security Council. Do you like that idea, and do you have other ideas for reform that you think is doable in the shorter term?
I very much like that idea, sir. Japan and Germany are two of the strongest participants and contributors to the United Nations today. They recognized early on, out of the dregs of the terrible the ashes of World War II, as the UN put it, that we need an international body where all countries can come and work out their problems, and so on. And that's what the United Nations has done in many instances. And just because it cannot stop the present wars, people are down on it and say, well, it's not powerful enough. And yet the agencies, the plethora of the agencies of covering virtually every aspect of humanity that the United Nations sponsors have helped virtually everybody in the world. And so I do think that the Security Council should be enlarged by giving permanent membership to Germany, Japan, India, and Brazil. Those 4 countries, and plus 2 African countries. And the United States is part way there by at least the Biden administration. Who knows what will happen now? But the Biden administration committed itself to the addition of 2 African countries. Of course, they have to work out which 2. And the poll was taken, and Nigeria and South Africa emerged as the 2 most likely candidates out of Africa. So I think that that reform of membership in the Security Council is urgent. Mitigation of the veto is also urgent. Maybe and I do not think it's impossible for them to come to an agreement, even on the Security Council, that the veto would only be used in extreme cases, and more, if you can't get rid of the veto, at least a more sharply defined restriction of its use should be done. And third, enlargement of the financial basis of the UN. I put it on a graph for my students one day, and it's breathtaking. On a graph, you put the world military expenditures on one line, and the expenditures for the United Nations on another line, and it's horrible. I mean, it's horrific. What you see, the gap between what we spend. We spend about maybe 0.5% or something like that on the United Nations is $30 billion a year compared to the $2.4 trillion a year that the world is spending on arms. So it means all this, in my view, and I in my long career, I mean, I've been an educator too, and I have learned that education is the main way to open up people's minds. And education, of course, in the classroom, formal education, of course, but also education through non-governmental organizations, through organizations just like the United Nations Association and many other comparable organizations, which people are being educated. So when people say to me, what can I do? I say, well, political outreach and education, keep working on these things. And with the realization that it takes a long time to build up the human mind to deal with with the realities around us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. When I think about where we are today, and I think about the United Nations as it has tried to settle some of the issues that are on the planet. Some of the people on this call today have so many ideas that we could use, like Smart Settle with Ernest Thiessen, ways to have negotiations using AI, having people on here, Sandy Hinden, all of you have, and David, they're just all people who are working to make this world a better place. And so we have to, as Martin Luther King said in Ending War 101, I can't remain silent if there's a war going on. And that's why we do Ending War 101. We saw how much money is being spent on armaments, having Canada, people going into Canada to buy armaments at this gigantic trade show. We need a trade show for peace. And, you know, we think about this. Where are we on this peace continuum? And I think we're at the tipping point. I really believe in all my heart that I don't know if you know about your college course where it said all the things you don't want come up before the break and the dawn of a new era, or the dawn of the priorities that we need. This is our time. And I'm not saying that we're not going to get it because of the new administration. I'm just saying that something is bubbling up. Pay attention. We might have enough for a paradigm shift. And that's because we have UNAs. And that's why I'm so proud to be a president of the Southern California Division. And that's why we have Rotary E-Club of World Peace, Rotary Action Group for Peace. And I think when we start to harness our coordination and work together and harness our joys and Pax Humana, as Jerry said, there's so much going on that's good. That's what I want to honor today. And I'm going to honor you, Douglas Roche. You are one of my heroes. When I watched your podcast today, we're at the 148th podcast. I said to myself, I am so lucky to gather these peace builders together and hear what they say. Because like Secretary Outant said, we're never going to have peace until we have peace education. Just like you said, Douglas, he said that. And then he also said, we're not going to have peace until we have a spiritual voice at the UN. So they invited the Pope. So you see these little things that turn into big things. And so that's what I'm saying. Don't remain silent. Learn, go to the UNA USA advocacy page. Invite your community to have a conversation with you. It might not be easy, but if you go to Rotary E-Club of World Peace and listen to the latest speaker on empathy, he shows you how you can have these conversations. In fact, I even wrote the book, Revolutionary Conversations, because I believed every conversation can begin to bring peace to that situation. And the revolution is stop. What do you do at a stop sign? You don't go forward until it's safe. So the first step in my little model for a conversation, just stop. Listen to the person who's talking to you. And when you feel comfortable, then you go to explore. But until you feel comfortable, don't get into it. You're not going to win anyway. Conversations begin with harmony. Okay, David, I thank you for your questions today. You got us started. Douglas Roche, I don't know if we could have had a more appropriate speaker at this time, a more encouraging speaker, a more factually filled audience of people who know what we need to do. But you giving us that little edge that we now are the solutions that the world has been waiting for. I always say that we are the people that the world's been waiting for, and we were born at the right time. And
That's
I
good.
think, Douglas, would you like to give us a finale?
Well, no, that's good. Obama used to say that too. It was never a better time to be born than this period of time, because we have so many facilities and mechanisms at our disposal to use. Just remember this: all the great social movements of our time, great social advances. I mean, the ending of apartheid and the civil rights, and the fall of the Berlin Wall, and those great achievements were started from the bottom up, not from the top down. I mean, it's people, a swell building and moving of people. It can achieve And as Margaret Mead used to say, it's the only way, is the only thing that can achieve it is that people's movements. If we sit back and wait for the politicians to deliver peace, we'll never get there. And so, by participating, Barbara, we are contributing, and we are in the energization of ourselves and energizing ourselves. We build up hope. I mean, I was pretty down there for a few days after November 5th, and but I started to come around when I realized that I have to practice what I have been teaching for all these years, and that which is the energization of myself in order that I can reach out and also build hope at the same time.
That's so beautiful.
That's the way to live.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You know, you said when I talked to you before our podcast the other day, you said, Barbara, we're living in historical times. We are living in historical times. And you all joined us today so we could hear Douglas Roche. And if you want to get his book, get it as Ray did. He got it on Amazon. It's you can't put it down. He's talked about young people contributing. He's talked about everything that needs to happen today. And I don't know if he wants you to know this, but he's working on a new book. And if that book comes out, it might come out on the day. You'll get more about that soon. I guess 27 will be your number for the finale of your books, right, Douglas?
We'll see, Barbara.
Well, God bless all of you.